Good evening and welcome to everybody. Nice to see you all. Beit Venezia is the Jewish intellectual and cultural home. Our roots are in Venice, but in an increasingly global, international, and virtual world. Beit Venezia has branches far and wide, even as distant as Poughkeepsie, New York, where I, the present director, am speaking to you from. I am the director of Jewish Studies at Vassar College and also the general director of Beit Venezia. And Beit Venezia, of course, also has a terrific web presence. And we are honored tonight and thrilled to launch a new project, a CD with the fabulous, the inimitable, the talented Frank London. And this is a CD that was produced in Venice. It is called Ghetto Songs, and it was part of the commemoration of the 500th anniversary of the world's first ghetto. And, you know, I first encountered Beit Venezia as part of a series of projects I did, one of which was our wonderful Jewish Studies study trip with Vassar College students under the auspices of the Fishman Family Endowment for Jewish Studies. We traveled to Venice to celebrate that anniversary. And about the same time, this concept was being developed. And the program, which was incorporated originally live performance, included music and poetry that emerges from the world's many ghettos. And the CD, which is coming out with Felmay right now and available, contains liner notes that were inspired in part by work that our students here did. And most importantly, it contains the work of Frank London, who is one of my great artistic heroes. I don't know if you even remember, but I think it was back in 1993 or 4 that the Klezmatics came to Vassar, and you signed a poster that's still in my office for Possessed, which is one of my favorite albums. But I follow and love everything you do. And I just wanted to ask you a few questions about the CD and how it came to be, if you don't mind. It's an honor and a privilege to introduce you. Frank, you've done zillions of CD projects and other artistic endeavors. You know, the list is endless. And yet you came to Venice and to Beit Venezia in particular. What brought you to Beit Venezia, and what's been your experience with our Center for International Jewish Studies?
Okay. My history with Venice actually predates my working with Beit Venezia. By the way, I should do the proper preface. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here talking with you, Mark. And great thanks to everyone at Beit Venezia and Manuela, who made this all happen, and Shaul, who we will be talking about a lot. So thank you to everyone here. And I can't imagine more interesting or appropriate partners to work with on large idea-driven projects such as this one. And Alavai, there should be many more. Okay.
Oh, mine! Oh, mine!
Amen, amen. That's the introduction. Okay, I had been going to Venezia for a number of years. I mean, and I'm certainly not alone in saying it's one of my favorite places on the planet. And we've had long discussions about what Venice is like this year of not having tourists after being a tourist center for 1,000 years. But that's another discussion. So I'd been coming to Venice and performing there and working with different people and a number of contacts there and just being in love with Venice. And I remember actually, and I know that Dr. Bassi is sort of hiding anonymously, but I hope he's going to fact check some of these things I'm saying in case I'm inventing history. But I do believe that my first connection with Beit Venezia, my very first one, was an introduction that was made by my colleague here in New York, Anthony Coleman, who's a
Mm,
pianist and a composer who had been doing a project with Beit Venezia, or it might have been even before Beit Venezia was officially an organization. So he introduced me, and I said, Anthony, I'd really love to do something in Venice. And I don't know, maybe he made the shidduch. I'm not sure.
mhm.
Maybe Shaul will fact check that. But in any case, I was invited. Oh, and in the chat window, Dr. Bassi says true. I'm waiting for the one that says false, but this is
Oh,
true.
right.
Right,
And this
exactly.
shaker, yeah.
So, I did get invited, and it was interesting because the purpose of the invitation was sort of clear, but also it was a really brilliant way to get to know each other. I was invited there, put up in an apartment. I think I was there for over a week. I think my wife even came. And the idea was just to get to know the city, to get to know the ghetto,
Mhm.
and to ask questions and to learn. I mean, what could be better? So the first trip I made was really a learning trip.
Hmm.
And the question was posed, okay, it's the 500th anniversary of the opening of the Venice ghetto. By the way, I like to say, I don't know, we have to figure out the terminology, Mark.
Hmm.
It's I can't believe that this is the world's first ghetto. We do know that it is the first ghetto to be called a
Oh,
ghetto.
a ghetto. Well,
But
Frank, it's interesting. I mean, I was just going to ask you the question of like what you thought of ghettos before, right? And then
it,
what you learned. But I will interpolate the following. Um, Jews in Europe usually lived on the high or cathedral streets of all the towns, right? So they were right where the action was because that's where they did business, but they lived in distinct neighborhoods. You know, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the Prioress's Tale begins. There was in Asia, in a great city among Christian folk, a Jewry, right, which turns out to be hateful to Christ, and it is open at either end, and through it men might ride or wend. So those neighborhoods were open neighborhoods, but eventually, I think Venice ghetto is the first enclosed ghetto. It wasn't the only enclosed
but
space in Venice.
you're talking about Jewish ghettos.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the
but there were
idea
ghettos
of
for Turks also in Venice, you
well,
know.
the idea of taking a group of people, usually
Right.
an underclass or a despised group or something, and putting them in a place. This is where you're allowed to be. I
Right.
mean, I don't have the facts, and we should find them out. But it seems like this is the kind of thing that must have been happening throughout history. You know,
As Mel Brooks would say, from the Stone Age, you
yeah,
know. Right.
exactly.
Right.
And Mel Brooks would say, well, he would say something. In
Right.
any case, so I was invited to talk about how do we, and we can't say celebrate because
Yeah.
you don't want to celebrate ghettos, commemorate 500 years of this, and it's a brilliant question, and it really it's circulated and thinking about Venice, and I've learned so much since then. And so that's how I first came to do this and first came to know Beit Venezia, of which I have to say, I know I'm sidetracking again, but I'm kind of in love with Beit Venezia. What is there's a phrase that you've used a couple of times in some of our correspondence. Beit Venezia calls itself
It's an international center, and it's a
an
home for
international
Jewish
center
studies,
for
Jewish
Jewish thought,
culture, and yeah,
Jewish
for
culture.
Jewish culture.
Okay,
Right.
so I truly, I will get back to Ghetto Songs, but I truly believe that you all are absolutely correct, and that this is the perfect thing for Venice, for the Venice ghetto. The Venice ghetto is a the contemporary Venice ghetto is a very strange phenomenon. And this was among the things that I encountered my first trip with Shaul, and exploring it and thinking about what to do, is that yes, there are certain distinct signifiers which tell us that this is a unique place, and it's very small for those who haven't been there. It's three little squares, and in one sense, there's nothing that either looks distinct from other places in Venice or that looks particularly Jewish. I've since learned that the fact that there are four windows instead of three, or the slightly higher buildings, indicate these things, but I wasn't aware enough to understand
Right.
that.
Right.
So that's the first thing. It doesn't have these signifiers. It's not like when you walk into the former Krakow ghetto in Kazimierz, which is just reeking of Jewish signifiers, you
Right.
know. And then secondly, what the two kind of most prevalent things that you see Jewish wise are absolutely unrelated to Venice.
Mhm.
You see this big memorial to the victims of the Holocaust, which is very much an East European memorial. It's really not a Venice memorial. And you see the Chabad house with and the Chabad Lubavitch Jews asking you if you've put on tefillin today, and that's not a Venetian experience either. I mean, Hasidim is an East European thing. So, of course, one gets deeper into it as one goes along. I remember the most important thing that I don't think you know about, Mark. I know Shaul does it. I have a friend named David Sella, and he
Mhm.
got married. He loves Venice. He's a huge
Mhm.
Venetiophile. And he got married in the synagogue, and I provided the music in the
Mm.
synagogue for his wedding. So I
Lovely.
did. That's when I started seeing, even before this, the inside Jewishness of it.
Correct. And I think that when you talk about Venetians and Italians, from the outside, a building may have five windows representing the five books of the Chumash, and that's all you would see if you saw it. But from the inside, it's something that's both lavish and Jewish. And I think I mean, that's, ghettos are about interiority in a way. So what you see on the surface in a ghetto is never what is really in a ghetto. Frank, can I ask you, the word ghetto, what does it evoke for you? And and how did that transform when you came to Venice? And how does that translate into choices of music? And maybe we can play a clip from from the CD. Why don't we try the war clip? The world is a ghetto. Shall we share that with people?
Sure, let's do that, and then I'll answer your question because
Okay,
it perfectly
perfect,
relates.
perfect. Okay, one
Nice
sec.
cover, by the way.
Nice cover. I like the cover. We really really went all out for the cover. Oh, is a ghetto. The world is a ghetto. Let's talk about that, Frank.
You asked me about my associations with the word ghetto.
Yeah.
I think that was your question.
Yeah.
So I grew up on Long Island, New York City, New York, about an hour outside of New York City, a pure working class suburban town. And when everyone talks about identity and I am this and I'm that, I am sort of a quintessential kind of either an American Jew or a Jewish American. I don't know which one. And what that means is that religiously, I am a Jew. I grew up Jewish. Culturally, I'm a pure product of American popular culture of my time. And my time was the same time that War was putting this song out. So you ask me, what is my experience of the word ghetto? I mean,
Papa D. Allen, right? You know, is that it?
What's
You
Papa
know,
D?
no,
Papa D.
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
He just passed away last month.
oh, really?
Yeah, we're talking about, by the way, for those who don't know, the lead singer of War who sang that song. He wasn't that old. So for me, ghetto at that point clearly meant inner city American, African American, hip music, hip scene, the life. And since, Harlem, Watts, this was ghetto. So the first meaning of ghetto for me is clearly that. The second meaning for me of ghetto, I was fortunate that none of my family, immediate or even distant that I know about, was actually killed in the Holocaust. My family, as much as I ever known everyone, I'm like a fourth generation American Jew. So we didn't have people, we're not East Europe, we're East European, but 180 years ago, 150 years ago. We don't speak Yiddish, none of this stuff. We're American Jews. So I didn't come with that cultural experience. Culturally, this is my music. But I started learning history. I was kind of obsessed in my teens with reading about the Holocaust. And then I learned about the ghettos. And I think that I sort of, even back then in my teens, made a leap. Wow, what is this thing called ghetto that means both these African American neighborhoods in and then by studying them you learn about the politics of urban renewal, the politics of class, of caste, of racism, and then you look into the ghettos in Poland especially. You keep on learning and connecting, and I think I began to get this kind of global connection even before I thought about it consciously.
Okay, so I hear that, and that's kind of, what I grew up with in Brooklyn, that idea of, you didn't go here or there because it was the ghetto, right? And then the Holocaust ghettos. But Frank, how do you get from there to here is my question.
Be still my heart. It's so beautiful.
Right. That is a very different kind of sound. Right.
Okay. So how do you get there? There are two answers. There are two questions, not two answers. There are two questions. How does one get there? Meaning aesthetically, how do we integrate these as musical pieces in a concert? Hold on. Let me just say it. How do you, but how do we get there conceptually? So,
Mhm.
like you and I both said, first ghetto, African American urban ghettos. Second ghetto of our experience, uh, Polish, German, Holocaust ghettos. And then the third and the fourth and the fifth, whatever, the more we experience world, more we get. And eventually you learn about the Venice ghetto. You know, this is all on the list, and you learn them. You know, this as an aside, there's something I've heard. I don't know if it's true. Um, if you speak one language, you learn a second language, you become bilingual. You learn a third language, and then after you learn three languages, I've been told that it's easier and easier to acquire many languages. It's like you've broken down a certain wall. And I think once I sort of learned that there were three ghettos, I
Ah,
started realizing, oh, this is not an individual thing. This is a thing. And that's where
right.
you start looking at it globally. And I know I'm going off topic, but I want to go back to the last topic about Beit Venezia as an international center of ideas, which
Mm.
I am so behind. And this led to the whole question of what did I come up with to commemorate the 500th anniversary, because I saw that the ghetto in Venice, through with Beit Venezia leading the way, and especially with such people as the two of you, Mark, Shaul, other intellectuals, this could be a center for ghetto studies, a
Mm.
global center for ghetto studies.
Mhm.
You know, because I always believe in the power of a place, a power of a time and a place. And when you're in this ghetto, it resonates, even though it hasn't been a ghetto for almost 400 years, just to keep our history straight. This was the first ghetto to be called a ghetto. This was the first time Jews were allowed to live in a city in Italy, definitely in Venice. But within 100 years, and Shaul can give us the exact number, Jews were allowed to live in the entire city. So it hasn't been a ghetto in 400 years
Mm.
or more. Shaul, put that lovely number in the chat window so we can sound like we know what we're talking about. Um, a little longer than I thought, until
Yeah.
1797. Let's call that
Right.
1800. So okay, more like 300 years. It hasn't been a
Still,
ghetto, but
still.
still, the idea of the global phenomenon of ghettos being studied in the ghetto has a lot of significance, power, resonance. And to answer your question, so how do we get, so that's how we get there philosophically. This is music from ghettos. That's the subject. That
Yeah, but
is the subject.
it's so eclectic. You know, the truth is, Frank, I'll be perfectly honest with you. You don't know this about me. I appreciate the Klezmatics. I like a little jazz, but really, music after 1700 leaves me relatively cold. And I opened this album, and I have some of my favorites by Rossi, right? I have little chazonas, both Italian and not. And then I have things that I never even imagined being see, I can't even speak. I'm so excited. Juxtaposed, right? Like the war song, and like you have art songs. So you have La Barchetta, which is part of a cycle of 6 songs on Venice, which was published by a German Jew who migrated to Venezuela, loved Venice,
I
and
thought he was
Michael.
Argentinian. I thought he was born in Argentina.
I
Am I
don't know.
wrong?
That's what my research indicates. Venezuela, but I may in fact be
Venezuela.
wrong.
Venezuela. You're right.
Venezuela,
You're right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I just listen to this. Wait, I don't mean to. This is to juxtapose these three things: war, right? Classical, Renaissance kind of music, and then this. It's just mind blowing and gorgeous. Of course, this is La
Before you play it,
Yeah.
a big shout out to Karim Suleiman,
Oh yeah.
who sings this, who I think has one of the world's great voices. And then
Oh,
we'll talk about
absolutely.
him.
And I would like to. I actually want to say that the whole your group was so professional, from Karim to Cantor Sveta Kundish to Yankee Lemmer, another cousin. You have, who did you have? Brandon Ross on vocals, Marika Hughes on cello. My God, Ilya Shenis on squeeze box, accordion, piano, organ, all of that stuff. Greg August on bass, Kenny Wilson drums, and Rashid Khalili oud and violin. And then you, whenever that mellow, wonderful, penetrative trumpet needs to come in, there you are. And throughout all this eclecticism, which is wonderful. Let's listen to La Barchetta for just a couple of minutes.
La notte bella fa presto ninetta, andemo in barchetta i freschi a ciappar, al tonico dito che ne fai ne cava per goder sta bava che subia dal mar.
Wow. You know,
Wow.
if
Okay.
that doesn't make you love music after 1700, I don't know what can.
And I have to say, I have to admit that conceptually, this is sort of the outlier on the record. It's not really about the ghetto. It is a love song to Venice, and it is so beautiful, and Venice is so beautiful, and my heart is so filled with it. I felt like, and Kareem's singing, I feel like this song embodies emotionally Venice, that I had to put it on. It's not about truth in advertising is not about the ghetto per se, but here's the real point. And I interestingly, Mark, I figured this out after we were done with the recording, because sometimes I really go with my artistic sense, my gut, my experience. When we started the concerts live, we came out with Donny Hathaway's song "The Ghetto," another song from my childhood.
Right.
And then the very second thing was the O Dolce Amarissime from some Salamani Rossi. And my point was, because I could have tried to go chronologically or geographically, and I said, no, if I throw it out 1, 2, then people understand the gamut of what we're talking about, and then the rest of it, they'll come along for the ride, and we'll take them on the trip. And what I figured out afterwards, what is this recording? What is this concert? Yes, it's a meditation. It's a mixtape on ghettos with Venice at the focus, with Venice very much in the forefront. But it's also my view of what a contemporary vocal recital should be.
Correct.
I have, Baruch Hashem, thank God, 4 of the most amazing vocalists one could ever hope for. You mentioned them all, 2 cantors, Chazan Yaakov Lemmer, Chazan Svetlana Kundish.
Usually one cantor is enough, really.
Yeah, exactly. Brandon Ross and Kareem Suleiman. And it used to be, as you know, a vocal recital would either be focusing on one era. This is the music of the Italian Renaissance, or maybe one composer. Kareem just recorded a record of just Schubert songs. But then, of course, over the last 40 or 50 years, with all the advents in contemporary thinking, you have people and different voices starting to do vocal recitals. So Patti LuPone will do a vocal recital, or someone like that. And they start including songs by Gershwin or Bernstein into a vocal recital. So I said, let's go the next step. Why do we have to think of a vocal recital as a genre-specific phenomenon that of only classical vocalists can have a classical vocal recital. And I think when we hear Brandon Ross's voice in the context being framed by, you know, an East European cantor and trained operatic voice, these are all great. You can hear it just as a great voice.
So, Frank, I see that, but I have to admit something. Like, I've been listening to music for the more than half century of my life, right? And there's a word that is used very often nowadays, which I despise: curate, right? People are we're curating a conversation. I just have conversations. I don't curate them. But the experience of working with you on this and just seeing the little fetches, the little changes, let's rearrange the order, let's disinclude this thing that I love, but include this thing that I liked less by itself. But oh, when it comes in here, you know, just the act of curating the CD in the way you did, and presumably the concert, was really stunning. And I learned a lot about how these things work. I know how to write a book. I know how to curate, you know, ideas and images into a book, but this is something that was a really a Gesamtkunstwerk, you know, everything together. My question for you about Venice specifically, what's on the album that really is music that was composed for Venice in the ghetto context? Even we have something there, right? There's
Yes, but it's funny because I'm looking at what you put in the chat window and it's not what you said would be next.
oh, okay. What do you want to?
Well, okay. You just asked what's music that is composed for the ghetto, and I immediately thought about the opening song, the Amorean, which is literally. So what happened? So I spent the time with Shaul and I came up with these ideas, like a ghetto. By the way, I don't know if you know all these ideas. Maybe I should tell you as the current president or whatever you are of Beit Venezia. I do believe not only should there be an institute for ghetto studies as part of Beit Venezia, but I believe that once things open up again, and they will, that we should have an annual music festival called the Ghetto Festival, the Ghetto Music Festival in the ghetto, and invite all these different kinds of bands from ghettos and have a ghetto festival. And we could curate the heck out of that.
I'm on that from the get-go.
You know,
whatever. Okay, yeah.
so for the year of the anniversary of the commemoration, what ended up happening, Beit Venezia produced an amazing production by the director Karen Coonrod of Merchant in Venice, because this is something that Shaul Bassi loves to say. He said the most famous Venetian Jew is a fictional character named Shylock, is the most famous Venetian Jew. And I love repeating that. It's so true. And the fact of doing a production of The Merchant of Venice bilingually in the ghetto square, again, the power of the place, the resonance of memory. If we feel that walls have memory, that stones have memory, that we're standing on the stones where Shylock would have stood in front of the bank where Shylock would have been, or the real bankers who banked there. And the opening of Merchant of Venice is a carnival scene, and it's a big carnival scene. And of course, Carnival of Venice, as a trumpet player, I've been practicing the Carnival of Venice since I was in about 6th grade, since I was about 11, with all the different variations. This is a famous cornet solo piece. So the idea of a Venetian carnival, and I'm also a big fan of different Italian musics, tarantellas from the South, these different, and the 6/8 rhythms as a carnivalesque. Because when we talk about carnival, and we can't sidetrack too much, but I'm obsessed with both with Bakhtin and his analysis of Rabelais,
Sure.
and the idea of the carnivalesque. So I wanted to do a carnival opening for Merchant of Venice that was Italian. It wasn't Venetian per se. The rhythm is closer to the Southern Italian. So Amore On, which is the text, and this is Karen Kunrad curating. She went outside of Shakespeare to have the very opening text by Ruzzato, correct? And it is an amazing text. You can't even really translate it. It kind of means love, eh? You know, and it's so funny because Merchant of Venice is all about these deep issues of money and power and Jew hatred and all these and everything. And ultimately, though, it's all talking about people falling in love and is the wife in charge? Is the husband in charge? You know, who loves who? And this poem is hysterically funny. And it says, you know, everyone talks about love. Who talks about love? Everybody. So you give a little bit of the carnivalesque opening of the record, which is again my homage to Venice and the Carnival of Venice. It out.
Very nice. Well, that's you know what I was thinking of in my text to you. I was actually discussing this with Agi over coffee this morning. So you really discovered the flavor, you know, for you of the ghetto. You say you're influenced by your love for Fellini and for Carnival and Nino Rota, right? And that's you know, that's a lot of the associations I have. When I first heard the sort of classical Jewish made or commissioned music of the Renaissance, it was so foreign to me. In other words, when I hear this music, I think of it as characteristically Italian. When I heard Rossi for the first time, or I heard the Mausur that the Italians sing, which we sing on Hanukkah, it was so different from my Ashkenazic experience that it was a kick in the pants and a wake-up call. I actually have a shiloh for you, Frank. So Agi and I were discussing this morning. I've read a lot about Rossi and Renaissance stuff, Jewish composed music, and I always wonder how it fit in the synagogue, since we know it was performed in the synagogue, with the nosach, with the standard cantorials. So the Chazan would sing, I don't know, right? And then you'd have a Kedusha or a Kaddish or an Adon Olam that was obviously in a different style than the Chazan's Retatachiv, right? What do you think, how do you think these things, the classical stuff, was performed in synagogues? Any clue?
I don't know enough. I don't know like what level of halacha they were following, whether they had instruments in Italian synagogues in the 1600s,
right?
Or because for those who don't know, you're not allowed to have instruments on most of the holidays. You're not allowed to play instruments on most of the holidays when you would have these big cantorial things. So it's a little bit of a contradiction, which is why most of the original East European cantorial recordings are all a cappella.
A cappella. These pieces were a cappella.
I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer.
I just said, but you know, we should listen to the Mausur, because for Ashkenazi Jews used to Mausur Yeshu, right? You know, this is something different, and it's evocative and it's ethereal. And man, the way you guys did it was just so beautiful. So
Before you play it, let's just
yes.
take a minute just to talk about, to give thanks to Benedetto Marcello.
Oh, amazing guy.
Now, some people think he composed this. This is Marcello's Mautzor. No, I part of the openness of my thinking, I've realized, it took me a while to realize how I think, is trying to make connections with anything I experience to my experience, so that things feel less foreign. And I realized that Benedetto Marcello was a music geek. He was a 17th, 18th century music geek. And just like I spent years transcribing Miles Davis solos, he spent years transcribing the music sung in Italian synagogues. Yes. And they didn't have recordings. So he went to synagogue. He's not Jewish. He's a Christian. He goes to synagogue and he learns the melody and he goes and he writes them down. And then he harmonizes them in his way. That's his addition, is the harmony. But really the melodies themselves. Now, here's my question that I don't know the answer to. You might or might not. How old is this Mautzor melody? When does it we know it's at least as old as Marcello, but when did they start singing it then? And where does it come from? So these are
right. So I mean, I think you could discern, since you are not only a musician but a musicologist in your own right, that there is there are modes here, whether Phrygian or Mixolydian, right, that are Eastern modes. I mean, this one might have been, in fact, Levantine origin. I can't tell, but one thing I know, I had a dream, Frank.
Uh-oh.
You were in the dream. You were in the dream. Wait a second. You're on the prow, because it was last night. I was hopped up on some, painkillers for my back or something. Must have been. You're on the prow of a gondola, okay? But you're also Benedetto Marcello. And it's dark out, and it's Hanukkah, and hung outside of all these Venetian windows are these triangular Chanukiot that get hung on the outside of the building, and they're lit, and people are singing on the inside, and you're in the prow of a gondola, and you're writing down the music. So I can't answer your question either, right? But I think we're thinking in the same direction. The idea of the music geek, the collector, and there've been so many of them. I mean, even Ansky, who was a dramatist, was a collector of music as well, right? So you're in good company. Let me play this so you can hear it.
Let me just throw this idea in before you hit play. If you take away all the harmony that Marcello put in and all the harmony and orchestration and improvisation that my musicians and I put in, I think it sounds, the melody itself sounds a little bit like a Gregorian chant. Okay. So I think it's a much older melody.
Wow. Okay. We'll listen for the bones while we listen to it. But, here's the thing, Frank. You put so much delicious flesh on the bones that, it's when you listen to this, you just want to consume it. You don't want to do archaeology on it. So we'll listen to it once. Then hopefully they'll buy the CD and they can strip it down bare.
Most
So beautiful, so beautiful. And there you are. I mean, that is the trumpet that defines it all. You know, we're running out of time. This has been so much fun, but we would be remiss if we didn't say something about the uniquely Jewish character of language in the Venetian ghetto. And we even have a song. Can you say something about Tahi Taha? Because I tell you, my wife walks around singing this song, which has some pretty outrageously vulgar verses about historical figures like Rabbi Yehuda Leon Modena and Sarah Kopia Sulam in it. So, you know, but the music is so great. And the language is not even Italian, it's Venetian. Tell me about that, Frank. That fascinates me.
So you just told us about a dream you had, and I'm going to tell you about a real thing that happened to me about an hour and a half ago.
Okay.
I was in a bookstore, actually, in the East Village here in New York.
There are still bookstores.
There are still a used bookstore, and they had a podcast playing in the sound system, and it was a dialogue about endangered and lost languages. And they were talking about languages where there's only 5 speakers left and they're all in their 80s, or the last speaker of a language dying, and the statistic, and I don't know, I'm not quoting, I'm quoting, but I'm not endorsing. It said that 90% of the world's languages will be extinct in the next 100 years. I have no idea. Okay, but the point is this. Languages tend to get clumped together, and there's the famous adage by Weinreich, I believe, who said a language is a dialect with an army.
Yes.
And for those of you who don't know some basic history, and I don't say that in a condescending way, because I only learned Italian history over the last maybe 2 or 3 years, and I'm in my 60s, when someone told me to read Il Gatto Pardo, the leopard, which talks about when Italy becomes a country, which is not that long ago. It was a set of what were they, fiefdoms, dukedoms, whatever we call them.
Yes.
And then each one had their own language. Now, certainly these languages were close to each other, but then one of them assumes prominence. That's the government. That's the nation. That's the language. And all the other ones are now called dialects. Oh, you speak in a Piedmontese dialect. So now to make that even worse. And then all of a sudden, each of these show how many different states and how many different languages were there before the creation of Italy. There's a question. But not only to make this more complicated, you had a Venetian, a Veneto language, which now became a dialect because it didn't have an army. But then you have the phenomenon that every Jewish community in the diaspora developed some sort of syncretic language. That's a mix of the Hebrew that we need, that Jews need to pray, to study our books, and the local vernacular. Yiddish is one of these. Ladino is one of these. These are the big famous ones. Everyone knows about Yiddish. But there were micro syncretic languages. And one of them, of course, is Judeo-Venetian.
Wow.
And it's not even
Italian, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a subset of Judeo-Italian. And I'm going to posit.
Yeah.
And again, shoot me down if I'm overstepping my bounds, Shaul, that this Judeo-Venetian dialect was born in the ghetto for that almost 200-year period that the ghetto existed. This is where that language would have been born. But
Absolutely.
300 years out of the ghetto, almost no one remembers this language, speaks this language. But we are blessed because Beit Venezia has a number of scholars. I can only mention 2, and I know there are more. So, and if Shaul puts some other names, I want to mention Gabriel Mancuso and Shaul Bassi. But if you want to put any other names, we have to end in a moment.
Yeah.
So they are preserving this language, and the way they did it, they got around together one night and they made a series of rhymes. Umberto Fortis is the world's authority on Judeo-Venetian. They came up with a bunch of rhymes, a bunch of what we call doggerel, which is a beautiful word,
Yes.
and they gave it to me. But you'll love this if you don't know this.
I have to say before we go out.
Hold on, let me just
Let's say
finish
it,
one thought. This is it, last one. So, and I set it to music, and we are doing our part to preserve Judeo-Venetian. And someone heard my music, and they said, "Oh, what's that old folk song?"
Ah!
So I did it. I wrote it trying to sound not like Franklin, and they said, "Oh, that's a folk song." Sorry, thank you very much.
What I wanted to say, Frank, is that the whole project has been the creation of a language. I mean, thanks to you, we have a musical language to express the eclecticism, the reach, the interest, the depth of what's going on at Beit Venezia. We would be remiss if we didn't mention Giuseppe Balsano, who was very much involved in the project from the beginning. I want to thank you, and all the listeners will go out on Tahitaha. I want to give a big shout out to the Fishman family because they help subsidize my participation in this project. I want to give a great shout out to everybody at Beit Venezia, to Shaul, to Barbara Del Mercato, who was involved earlier, and to Manuela, who is involved now, and especially to you, Frank. This has been a delight. I love to talk to you. We'll continue the conversation, but let's say goodbye on sort of on the note.
I'm gonna throw in two more names: Sheila, who helped us so much, and Renzo at Thelme Records.
Yes,
but I'm sure there's more.
There's always more, and I always tend to forget, the most important ones. But of course, Sheila, and certainly Lorenzo, and enjoy Tahitaha. Thank you, Shaul. Thank you, Frank. Thank you to everyone. Oh, of course, we mentioned Sheila. We didn't mention Murray Baumgarten. Very, very instrumental. Thank you to everybody who's been involved. And we hope you enjoy the CD as much as we've enjoyed being involved in its creation. Thanks. Take care. Have a good evening, everyone. Ciao.